Hey guys, Chris Dunn here, aka the Boogeyman. On this episode of Boogie Tech, how to get more power out of your distributor. Won't cost you a dime, it's free, and you will make more power. And also, we're going to discuss, does a crank trigger make more power than a distributor? Stay tuned, here we go, let's roll. All right guys, here we go. Distributors, okay? Crank triggers, all right? Let's start off with the crank trigger. Crank triggers do make more horsepower than a distributor. We have proved this to ourselves time again on the dyno. We have run straight distributor, then we have went over to the crank trigger, rephased the distributor, and we have made more power. That's put an X in the box, it's done. Yes, crank triggers make more power over the distributor. Now, there's two reasons why a crank trigger makes more power. First reason, if you ever been timing your engine, all right, and you ever watched the marks on the harmonic balancer jumping around, and you know, you rev it up and you advance it, and it's moving, and you know, when you advance it, it slows down some, but it still jumps. And it jumps a degree this way and a degree this way, and you know, you kind of put it in the middle of where you want it. Okay, 1 degree of timing on an engine can affect 20 horsepower plus on an engine. That's just the facts. We've seen that on the dyno, 1 degree. So if you think about it, when the timing's jumping around and it's doing that while it's running, it's dropping a degree and it's adding a degree, that is taking horsepower away. It adds, it takes, it adds, it takes, it adds, it takes. And at the end of the run or the end of a pull, that drops the average down because all your horsepower's, it has, you know, moved around a lot. Now, if you've ever timed an engine with a crank trigger, it is almost like the harmonic balancer is frozen in time. It is stopped. You're like, is the engine even running? Basically because it's picking up off the crank and it's firing right off the crank itself. So it has no interruption between firing and being told to fire. All right, and you're gonna say, well, what do you mean by that? Well, you go through a timing chain or a timing belt, okay, and this is in a small block Chevrolet, and you go, you know, 22 inches of camshaft to a distributor that's also running an oil pump, okay. There's a lot of twist and flex and slack and this and gears and chains and this and that. So time it gets to the distributor, there's a lot of interference between there. So that's the reason that the timing's jumping so much. You got slop in the gear. You got slop in the timing chain or the timing belt. Follow me? So that's the reason that your timing's jumping like this when you're trying to set it. That's all it is. It's just so much interference between there and actual firing of the distributor. All right, now, a crank trigger picking up off the crank don't have that interference. So every time that crank comes around, that earth magnet says fire. All right, now it also fires twice. Fires on the exhaust stroke and on the intake stroke. So it's very, very accurate. That's one reason you pick up power, because now you've got the fluctuation of the timing out of the equation. Now, I'm sorry, I had to look at my mic because I couldn't remember if my mic was on or not. Now, the second part of that equation is where it picks up power, and it's also how you can pick up more horsepower for nothing out of your engine that don't have a crank trigger. I stumbled across this by accident. All right, let me explain how. Because I'm new to the racing and building engines and stuff like that. When you put a crank trigger on, you must phase the distributor. Basically what that means is, I've got a little distributor cap here with a hole in it. And basically once you're firing off the crank trigger, you want to line the pointer, okay, of the rotor button. You want to line it up with a lug. So you would literally loosen up the distributor, pull this around. Lots of people put a hole, like I said, in the top of the cap, and they'll put a mark right here and they'll see it. And basically what you're doing is you're phasing, you're pulling the pointer on the rotor button around to line up with the lug of the plug wire. All right? That's called phasing, okay? That also picks up horsepower. Because now you're not, if you're in a race engine, and a lot of these race engines that we run, especially in the gas world, we're running 40 degrees plus of timing. All right, let's go through a simple thing. And we're fixing to go to the board and explain how this picks up power by rephasing the distributor. For example, all right, we got a distributor here. Of course, that don't work, so let's go to the red one. All right. We got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Plug wires. We got a rotor button. Okay. We've got the electrode on the end of the rotor button. All right. If you take a 360 degrees divided by 8, it's 45 degrees, okay? So if your timing is at 40 degrees plus, it ain't pointing right here where you want it to be. And this is where, let's just say if this is firing here, it's literally almost under the next lug, the next plug wire. So it's jumping fire, but it's also picking up a crossfire from here. So that's an interference. So now it's cross-firing. It's not clean. It's getting this, it's jumping around. All right. Now, when you run a crank trigger, you come back in phase. Let's just say if you use it 20 degrees of timing, which would be about in the middle, you come back and you phase and loosen up the distributor and point it directly at the plug wire. And you basically phase it around. And you do that on number 1. Just put your timing light on. You can shine your timing light right down in that little hole, and you can turn the distributor till you see it lightening up on top of the electrode. Or I got one that Bob showed me. I drilled a hole right here, and I put a silver mark on the rotor button. And when it lines that silver mark up, you lock it down. Now the distributor is in phase. Okay, so it's phased. Now at my timing, we're probably within right here of the wire. So we have no crossfire. We don't have another plug wire jumping back trying to fire. And it just wanting to jump over here. Follow me? All right. Now, this is how I hope everybody understands that. It's pretty simple. It's really, really simple. Okay? Now, this helps if you go to Dyno. I'm not going to lie to you. You could do this on the track, I think, but it really helps if you go to Dyno. I know in our race engine, Yum Yum Eat 'em Up 2.0, it likes 41 degrees of timing. Okay? That's what it likes. That's what it wants because we've been to the dyno so much. So I move it around to 41 degrees of timing, and I drop the distributor in it, 41 degrees, or somewhere close to that, whatever tooth allows me to get the closest to that. So going back to my original drawing here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Now, by doing that, I've now got the electrode on the rotor button pointed almost directly at the plug wire, at number 1. Okay? So now a degree this way and a degree that way is no major big deal. I'm still on, right up under the plug wire. So now I have no crossfire, and now it picks up power. This is a fact. We have done this on the dyno. You can pick up horsepower by doing this. Now, do you need to know where your engine likes timing? Yes, you do. Or you can just say, hey, it's at 40 degrees, and you drop it in at 40 degrees, and you can try it from there. It does help to go to the dyno. The dyno does make a big difference because it kind of gives you a baseline. But that's what I call manually phasing the distributor in without a crank trigger, and it works. Now, when you do this, we have went on crank trigger and off a crank trigger, and there was only 3 horsepower difference when you phase the distributor in without a crank trigger to the timing that your engine wants. Now, if you run a crank trigger alone and you phase it, okay, without your engine without this being just like you would normally run it. A lot of people probably drops in at 20 and the pointer, the electrodes at somewhere else. There is a 15 horsepower gain going to a crank trigger. Okay, so if you got rules that says that allow you to have crank trigger, put a crank trigger on your race engine. It is the best $300 you will spend. You will pick up more power with a crank trigger. All right, they crank better on a crank trigger. It's more accurate with a crank trigger. So my advice, if you have rules that allows you to have crank triggers, put a crank trigger on there. Crank trigger, phase distributor in, and it's just it's a night and day difference. The engine will sound crisper because of how clean it's firing. It is a major, major advantage with a crank trigger. Now, if you got rules that does not allow you to have a crank trigger, okay, which is where I race at, they don't allow it, phase in the distributor. Find out the timing that the engine likes, pull the distributor out, and drop it in at that timing or as close to that timing as you can. You will pick up power, all right? You will get the most maximum amount of horsepower out of what you got right there. Now, MSD makes a rotor button that's adjustable for phasing in the distributors. Problem of it is they don't adjust enough. If you drop the distributor in at 20 or 30 degrees, they only go like 20 degrees or maybe it's either 10 or 15 degrees. I've got one, it don't really work. Just pull the distributor out, drop it in, save, you don't even got to buy the button, and you're done, and you're phased in. And like I said, I didn't know no better. How I stumbled across this was I was dropping the distributor in at 41 degrees when we rebuild the engine because I knew it liked 41 degrees. I didn't drop it in at 0 or 20 degrees like some people drop them in on race engines, like 20 degrees because they know they got to go 20 more degrees. I dropped it in literally at 41 degrees or right around there because that's what I didn't know no better. I knew that's what the timing it like. And that's the reason that when we are on the dyno, we're almost phased in. I can put the cap on and we're phased. That was the reason that the phasing, I believe, puts up so much more horsepower because when we switched to a crank trigger just to check it, we only gained 3 horsepower. Where before when we had checked it, when the distributor was out of phase running without a crank trigger, we gained 15 horsepower when we rephased the distributor and went on to the crank trigger. So this is a good way, it won't cost you a dime to make anywhere, I'm going to go on a limb, you can make anywhere from 10 to 15 horsepower by phasing in your distributor. That is a fact. We have proved it on the dyno. So, hope this helps you. I like sharing information. I get in trouble sometimes with someone. Why would you tell that to make 12 horsepower? Hey, I'm here to try to help you guys. Like I said, that won't cost you a dime. It'll make you more horsepower if you're at a place where the rules dictate that you can't use the crank trigger. But my best advice to you, buy you a crank trigger. Chris Dunn, a.k.a. the Boogeyman.